Hey everybody, welcome back to Old World Legends, where we focus on growing the community. I'm your host Mike, and with me as always is Evan.
Yes, and today we're going to be jumping into the spirit of Old World. Why do we play the game? What makes the game fun? And how you can make sure that both you and your opponent are having fun.
Absolutely. I think we've had a lot of episodes lately where we've really been into the deep crunch of the rules and the mechanics, a lot of things. And we said, hey, you know what? There's a whole other series that we've been talking about for a while and wanted to kick off. And hopefully we're going to have multiple videos in this where we want to talk about, as Evan said, the spirit of the game, right? And really, when you mean the spirit of the game, what you're talking about is the community. And we say it at the beginning of every one of our episodes, we are focused on growing the community because at the end of the day, we've all played, at least most people, if you're listening to this channel and you subscribe to us, you play tabletop games. You've been playing for a while, likely, and you've probably played other games as well. This is probably not your first one. And as we all know in the tabletop gaming community, right, it doesn't matter how good a game is. If you don't have awesome people to play the game with, then it doesn't matter, right?
Yeah,
And so many games have come and gone and died over the years and so forth and so on. And there's just something special about the GW games in particular that are certainly more sticky, more tangible, last longer. There's more communities to grow out them. Now, I will say this, Old World certainly had a massive advantage versus other game systems that, hey, there's 30 years of legacy content when Old World came out. So it was this massive already previous following and so many different things and so much of the companies built upon it. But that being said, for us, I know for myself and Evan joining me shortly after, I started in SoCal here. Once they brought it back, right? I was crushed as many people were when fantasy was killed, and had to wait a decade, never knowing if it was going to come back, and told myself if it ever returns, I want to make sure that the community that I wish existed when I was playing, because it was a little salty to a little bit edgy back in the day,
yeah,
the community I wish existed, that we have seen those fantastic strides in other communities. I do want to say, while no community is perfect, that's certainly very true. The evolution and the positive sportsmanship and etiquette has certainly evolved over the last decade in the 40K community quite a bit from where it was to where it is now. And there are pros and cons about the current community. But I think everyone who's been playing 40K for over the last decade can agree the competitive scene today, the event scene today, is significantly healthier than it was a decade ago. And a lot of those lessons and a lot of those good things have come over to Old World as well. Here's just some
right.
simple examples to start the conversation. You can measure anything at any time.
Yeah,
That sure does help with a whole bunch of conversations to mitigate things. And you can also, that's just one simple example. And also, you reveal your list at all time because it used to
yeah,
be
you
part
don't
of
hide
this.
it.
The spirit of the game used to be hiding things. That used to be a big part of Warhammer, of Old World, and 40K and other systems, but now that's considered a gotcha and people don't do it anymore. So anyway, so this episode, we really just want to talk about kind of a back and forth conversation about, we've been growing this community, Old World Legends, for almost 2 years now at this point, since they relaunched the game. We're going into the later half of the second year, and we have a phenomenal, honestly, I cannot believe how many awesome people we have in our
Yeah,
community. Had at this point unique individuals come to our events. We've had, I think, over 120 people come to our events from SoCal and also from the Bay Area and surrounding some out of states as well. Pretty amazing, and we're still growing, which is phenomenal. And we keep having new people come back, new people join us, and then the existing players keep coming back. And that's really a testament to the community that's being built, which is the spirit of the game. So, Evan, I know you play a lot of our events. Now, let's talk about when we say spirit of the game, there's people who chase the meta, and then there are people who are hobbyists, and there are people who are kind of generalists. I like to call them casual competitive. They'd like to win, but they're really there to hang out with their friends. These all can coexist in the same community, but they also have different goals, don't they?
yeah. I mean, some people see the game as a puzzle, where the answer to the puzzle is how do I build the right list and play it in the right way so that I have the
Mhm.
highest chance to win into the field of other lists. Now, this puzzle is really exciting and engaging to engage with because every list
Yeah.
that answers one question generally has also a lot of downsides. In fact, Warhammer Fantasy and Warhammer in general, even 40K for example, is usually full of skew. And what I mean by that is my list is all monsters and they're all really, really tough. So if your army's full of, really low strength attacks, you're going to have a really hard time getting through it. And there are some armies in the
Mhm.
game where their whole identity is basically being a skew, where, like, for example,
Mhm.
ogres is just being really tough with multi-wound models, or the new Slayer
Yep.
army that has recently been revealed is all we are is a bunch of naked guys who are unbreakable. So I'm never running away from you. I'm never breaking from combat. So all of your like leadership shenanigans you're going to try to do don't matter
Mhm.
about to me, right? So skewing into a particular aspect of the game isn't necessarily wrong, and it is in some ways entirely intended. However, there are
Mhm.
skews that people can go down which make the game very unengaging. So what do I mean by that?
Now,
Engagement is
before we
yeah.
break that down, Evan, let's actually separate out. Skew is typically considered a negative connotation.
Right.
There's the exact same list building concept that's a positive connotation. Hey, thematic list, right?
Right. Yeah,
These are
having a theme.
literally the exact same thing, but one has a negative connotation, one has a positive connotation. And guess what? Both exist in the old world, right? There are plenty of skew lists where you take, for instance, if you do the Chaos Knight all cavalry list, that's a fun thematic list. There's a whole arcane journal dedicated to that list. Not super competitive, but it sure is cool. It sure is fun
I
to
actually
see it
think it's
on the
pretty good.
table.
I think people need to try
Uh,
more of it. I think the latest update to the Herald of Darkness is
it's
pretty
a
freaking
little
good.
better. There are some different versions, and like one of the most popular skew lists we saw over the last year was the troll list. Of course,
Yeah.
that was a very popular list. So, but everyone, right? But that certainly we didn't see too many troll lists winning two-day events and such. Anyway, so these are both you and they can coexist. You can have
Yeah.
a list that's very thematic and flavorful and such, but still skewing heavily into one type of mechanic or unit, and it can still potentially be very competitive in the meta relative to what is the state of the meta at that time that you're playing the list.
Right. So the difference between a thematic list, like for example, you can't play Nomadic Wa without skewing into every single unit has basically Swift Stride, right?
Yep,
I mean, they're
pretty
basically
sure.
saying if you want to play Nomadic
Yeah,
Wa, which isn't necessarily the strongest Orcs and Goblins list, your whole
no.
army is fast. That's cool. There's nothing wrong with that. And so, what is the difference between a thematic list, a skew list, and something that's unengaging? That's kind of a spectrum here. So, just taking any old nomadic wall list, I don't think that there's a nomadic wall list out there that's too unengaging, but there are definitely unengaging lists in the meta, and you should be aware when you're going to either build a very competitive list to try to win a tournament, or if you're trying to have a fun, casual, or weekend game with a friend you really don't want to upset, right? Or you don't want to accidentally say, "Oh no, I didn't realize this is how it was going to turn out," and so that's when I talk about unengaging. So a game is engaging when both players have agency that some of their units that they're taking have ways to interact with the others. Like, for example, I
Mhm,
can charge you and then we get into combat and we can both fight. If a unit in the
mhm,
game had an ability where even if you charged me, I wouldn't take any damage, like for example being ethereal, well, that
mhm.
is a one way that you can become unengaging to a certain selection of enemy units. Um, Being unengaging in any of a number of different ways is usually incredibly powerful and is often expensive. So in terms of points, so like having a dragons, for example, are usually very high toughness. You can take a lot of defensive items on them to make them harder to wound. So yeah, there are a
Mhm.
lot of points, but they can also be very unengaging against certain armies where if they don't have anything that can fight them, then they don't have any way to engage with that opponent. So when people go to a tournament, even if they are the competitive casual, which is essentially the 80% of the crowd that's out there, right? They still want
Maybe
to,
higher than that, maybe
yeah,
90%. Yeah.
they want to bring a list that has a way to engage with each of the skewy or unengaging and potentially unengaging armies that are out there, right?
Mhm. Yeah, and more often than not, the casual competitive player, which is the vast majority of the people who play
Yeah.
this game, and a lot of them don't even have yet to be to an event. And obviously, we want to grow the community and get them out to events because it's really fun to hang out with a room full of friends who all love the hobby that you love for a weekend. It's super cool. But they, right, more often than not, they're just like, I just love this model, or I just painted this up, or I just love the theme, or I named this character, right, or this guy is from my D&D group and I made an army about him. Like, it's just so many different reasons, and it is the immersion, right, that they are creating, their hobby, their craft, that often is what's compelling them forward with their list. But then they do look for, okay, let me look online, let me look at other events, let me talk to my friends, let me list build. And list building is super fun with people to make sure I'm at least showing up with something halfway decent. At least that's what most people have that goal. So, and there's nothing wrong with that whatsoever, and they have a great time. But I think the core of the engagement conversation we're getting to, and I think that's where this conversation is going, is it's a two-player game. Remember, you're not trying to win, you're trying to build a community, right? It doesn't matter if you won all your games if you don't have somebody to play against the next week, right? Or the next month, right? And I can tell you, as somebody who's been playing for basically 30 years now, it's not about this event or that event. It's about the friends and the events 2 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, right? And building in those relationships. And one thing that is truly special about Warhammer, the Old World, or to be fair, tabletop gaming in general, because it's inherently a social game and you are playing with somebody on the other side of the table, it is one of the few hobbies out there where I could definitely tell you men who are, past their 20s, right, who are focused on their careers, make new friends.
Yeah.
That is truly special. I have made so many friends. I know Evan's made so many friends. Everybody, so many. You're not going to be friends with everybody, but you will make so many friends by just hanging out and with this hobby and talking hobby and playing the game with these people. And that is truly something special about tabletop gaming, which is why we are so focused with Old World Legends about growing the community and the spirit of the game. So as Evan's getting to the point of engagement, one of the things you want to make sure is whether you win, whether you lose, because let's face it, you'll win some games and you're going to lose a lot of games too. And guess what? At events, only one person typically ever wins all their games. That means everybody else lost at least one game or drew a game. That's how it goes. That's okay. But the most important thing is building those friendships and those relationships and making sure that not only you are having fun, winning or losing, but the person on the other side of the table is having fun. So they're like, you know what? I had an awesome game with this person. I want to play them again, whether you win or lose. And I think that's where we're getting to lists, whether they are thematic, whether they are skew, whether you happen to be a Wood Elf army, whether you happen to be whatever, lists that ultimately don't support engagement, don't create, which effectively means there's not an interesting choice for your opponent, right? They're just stuck. Something just happens to them. Versus engagement means, hey, Evan put his unit forward. I have interesting choices of what I'm going to do with my unit in response to that. That creates a really fun game. And when you start having lists or skews or other things that create disengagement, I can tell you right now, fun factor just plummets.
Yeah, and it can definitely feel like, oh, if this one roll doesn't go my way, then the game's over. Well, if the game's engaging, then it's definitely not over, right? I mean, if your main unit fails its panic test and runs off the table on the first turn, that can certainly feel like, well, there's definitely no way I'm going to win now. But you still have plenty of other units left that can still do something to the enemy, I assume, right? Now, this gets a lot worse in particularly bad matchups or particularly skewy situations. And in a sense, I think that highly competitive Warhammer is a little bit silly because, first of all, this is supposed to be fun. But second of all, it's so matchup dependent. If you try to take the best list of a given army, which usually people do not switch armies or pick an army just because it's good, because it doesn't stay good long enough to really invest.
It really doesn't.
Throwing so much money
after.
Changing. Yeah, so if you're out there right now, you're like, man, I really want to win tournaments, but I actually am going to paint all my models myself. I'm going to go buy a whole bunch of the latest hot craze and paint it up. By the time you're done painting, it might not be winning the tournaments anymore, right? But just to give you a rundown of what we mean when we say unengaging, I have a list here because we are working up to our first narrative event, and my big goal for the narrative event is to not have any matchups where people feel like they don't have a way to engage with their opponent. And that means that taking everything under the sun that can just win at all costs or be able to try to do the highest score, highest battle points, isn't the goal. The goal is to have an engaging and interesting battle where maybe one side wins, maybe one side loses, but you have a good story that comes out of it.
You have a great weekend. That really is the only goal, is you're having a great weekend with some friends. Because also keep in mind, not only is the meta always changing, it doesn't matter. You might have the best list under the sun, and then the dice gods will betray you at the worst possible time, and you'll roll all those ones. And even though you had all the right answers at all the right places, it still might not go your way, right? To Evan's point, like the spirit of the game is to play a game, right? It's here to have fun. You can have fun and compete at the same time, and both players can have fun and compete at the same time, even if somebody wins and somebody loses. That is very much true. And when that's happening, honestly, some of the best games I've ever had is when I know I've lost, and I'm just like, all right, I've lost. I'm going to go all in and do as much damage as I possibly can and make this as interesting as I can for the two of us.
Yeah,
And then I end up start laughing at all the crazy zaniness that happens in Old World,
yeah.
because just all sorts of, once you stop like really trying to win, you're like, all right, we're just going to see what happens. That's when you get some of your best stories of just stuff that would never have happened normally. And all of a sudden, like, yes, that goblin slayed the dragon, or I ran down this general unit. It's like, I would have never charged that with a goblin before. So that's actually some of the best stories is when that happens.
Yes. So just to give a list real quick, because we're one of the things we'll do in a follow-up videos is going through example army lists, especially people out
Hmm.
there who want to know what should I play if I want to have a fun and interesting game and I want to be able to compete against the highest top of the meta, but I don't want to have the other player, my opponent, not have any fun. And
Hmm.
so here's my current list that I'm working from. If you spend a huge number of your points on units that fly, in particular, there's demons and high elves have a way to basically spend 1,500 points or more on things that fly. And
Hmm.
one of the problems with this is that if the enemy is a not flying, not skirmishing melee army, it's actually possible to just never be in contact with them ever because you can just
Hmm.
always fly over them or flee and rally and then fly over them afterwards. So having too many points spent on flyers can certainly make some matchups feel like not very engaging for your opponent. Remember, that's what we're focusing on here. Um,
Hmm.
the next one is having a characters who are very, very, very unkillable. So generally the two combinations here are having like triple saves that are like 5-ups at least, and have 8 or 9 wounds, something like that. Or if you have a character who has multiple sources of always on -1 to be hit, so having like the Wood Elf character with Bedazzling Helm and also the -1 hit in a challenge. So and he's already weapon skill 7, so now he's pretty much a 6+ to hit by anyone who's not a Bloodthirster. So
Hmm.
those are two, kind of more on the character side. Having bonuses to cast that are so monumental that basically nobody will ever be able to roll a dispel roll against you. Now, Mortuary Cult used to be really guilty of that, basically by
Hmm.
design, and then they fixed it. And it's like, wow,
Yep.
something that wasn't engaging, and Games Workshop made an improvement. Hopefully, that
To be
is the
fair,
future.
they've made multiple improvements,
Yeah,
and I do want to take a moment to pause and acknowledge that are things in the meta currently not the best? Of course, there's always the next contender of the next problem, right? You squash one alpha predator, the next alpha predator takes its place. But I do want to say, compared to for those of us who played fantasy back in the day, and you could go multiple editions without getting a new army book, right? The fact that the current team, right? And again, they're a small team. I know the rumors are going about that they're theoretically growing and getting more resources because Old World is succeeding beyond their expectations. Great. That's part of the reason why we're so inspired, because we believe in this game is going to be a major game 10 years from now, right?
yeah,
Um, but the point is that the team, the GW team, the FAQs have been very meaningful. There was a big gap from like 1.2 to 1.51, but 1.51 is huge. It's almost a reboot of the game. It truly is like an edition zero point 0.5 of the game, almost like they're testing lots of stuff out. And there have been tremendous improvements over the course of the last year and a half, going on 2 years now. So big props to the team for not ignoring the community, not ignoring the problems out there. Would we like them to respond a little bit faster? Yes, sure. Everybody would always want that. But at the same time, it's also a lot of energy to keep up with all the rules changes and such. And remember, not everybody's going to a tournament every single month, right?
yeah.
Most people, I'd say, go on average every 2 to 3 months at most, right? Like once a quarter might be the average for a lot of players.
I will say though, Mike, that there is still you have to keep up to date somewhat so that you don't walk up to the table and say, wait, so what is this thing called Ring of Jet that's on your army list 7 times, right? So
You
you're
do.
still,
You
even if
do.
you're not, so points and balance updates, surely they disrupt everybody because no matter which army you're playing, it affects you. But
Yeah.
just a new book being released for some army that you don't play it still affects you in the sense that if you play against them, you need to know potentially what it's doing and make sure they're not playing it wrong, and they keep up with the latest FAQ community. So there's still definitely
Mhm.
something to keep up with. Okay, so just to finish off my list real fast, so we talked about characters that are hard to kill, having lots of minuses to hit, for example, on characters, having lots of things that
Mhm.
fly. My other things I have here are basically if you have a massive portion of your army is stone throwers or cannons. I don't think that bolt throwers are that big of a deal, but I think that when you have stone throwers or cannons that usually do like the D3 or D3+1 wounds, um, that they can certainly form into this kind of a I'm just going to shoot you and you're not going to make it across the table type of vibe. Um,
Well, effectively, what they are is a whole bunch of things that can focus fire with
yeah,
very powerful ranged attacks. Because if you have a whole bunch of crossbowmen, they cannot focus fire nearly as effectively as those war machines can. So they have huge range, huge threats, very effective, generally speaking, they are fairly reliable. Even, one six is a misfire, but generally speaking, they are way more reliable than the other things. So again, it's having a whole bunch of very reliable ranged attacks that can focus fire can be very punishing.
yeah, and under this same category would be things that are a little bit harder to specify, especially on like a narrative guideline. But for example, having the classic Nuln Outrider list, where you have 3 units of 10 Outriders who have guys who give them no -1 to penalty to shoot at long range, and they can already move and shoot. So now they're just ripping like 90 shots at you that usually hit on fours. And people really don't like Dragonfire bombs because they're strength 4 AP1 and a million attacks. So are a bunch of Nuln Outriders who had strength 4 AP1 attacks from,
Yeah.
even further
Mhm.
away. So those are the kinds of things that, just really long range shooting, a lot that is actually good. I guess it's hard to put it that way, but yeah, it's long range shooting that's pretty good is potentially a skew that you can play in the competitive scene and play at the top table
Mhm.
with, but it's
Mhm.
very easy to have the opponent not have a lot of fun if they have the bad matchup, right? Or if they didn't tech their list specifically to counter what you're doing.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to, again, as we said, 90% of the players are casual competitive. So they are bringing the list they have been building for a
Yeah,
year, 2 years, sometimes longer, and they just got it painted, or they're still painting it, right? And so the vast majority of players who are going to this event to hang out with you, for the 1 day or the 2 days or whatever, um, they're not all up to date on the latest FAQs or the latest tech or the latest match play guide or the latest counters, right? Some of them will be, but the majority of them will not be, right? And so they won't be prepared for those skews. And that happens a lot more often than you think.
all right, so the next one is I mean, everyone knows that when the Pillar of Fire worked in such a way where you got to control the direction it went, and
Hmm.
Wood Elves, Sisters of the Thorn, were able to pick the spell, that being able to
Hmm.
spam, in particular, the same spell that was remains in play over and over and was really hard to dispel because you weren't even in range. Like, there's five
Yeah.
different reasons why this was comped and changed in the FAQs to not work this way. But just
Hmm.
having many instances of the same spell used to be not allowed by the core rulebook. In 8th edition and before, if you had wizards and they rolled their spells and they rolled the same one as each other, they would have to pick something different. And you could actually take advantage of this to try to make sure that you got banishment, for example. There was a Lore of Light
Hmm.
spell on your level 4 wizard because by rolling the level 2 first, you roll banishment, you make sure to swap it so that then the other guy will get it. That's an example of how people were able to abuse the system, and they tried to prevent you from doing that. But now there's a different problem, which is what happens if everyone just picks the same spell because they have Ring of Jet, or if they have a bunch of Cathayan Jade Sentinels, or a bunch of Sisters of the Thorn, and they all pick Fireball, or they all pick Unquiet Spirits. And you just have so many
Yeah.
instances of the same spell coming at you, and you're like, really? You know?
And to be fair, it's not even spell specific. This just goes
Yeah.
back towards the skew lists, right? In terms of, hey, there's something that's really, really good, whether that's a war machine, whether that's a magic user, whether that's a flying knight on a horse with wings, whatever it is, effectively, you find something that's super effective. It doesn't matter, it could be beautifully painted, it could be super thematic, but you find something and then you take as many of it as you can.
Yeah.
Now, there's a reason why the core rules of this game have different composition, right? And they have different composition, your hero composition, your core, your special, your rare. They have certainly changed it in this edition than previous editions, allowing a lot more character points than they ever have in previous editions. I personally believe that is not great for the health of the game, but it's certainly great for a new player having to buy less models just to get on the table. So pros and cons. But there's a reason why army composition has always existed in this game for forever back in fantasy. There's a reason why it exists in 40K. There's a reason why rule of three has has existed for a very long time. There's a reason why the match play guide has further restrictions on army composition, is because inherently, even the casuals, the 90%ers will say, "Oh, this is good. How many of these can I take?" And they're going to take as many if they can. And if it's not balanced, great. Which often it's not about, hey, this is super broken. It's just that if you're inherently you start skewing into something, and if your opponent didn't take the solution to it, which most players are not going to. Again, everything has a counter in the game, but most players aren't thinking about bringing the counters in the game, or they just might have taken an army that doesn't necessarily have a counter, right? So, because not every army has access to every single thing, right? So that's intentionally by design. Armies are stronger at some things, mediocre at some things, and then weak at some things, and that's to make more thematic interest. So you're going to run into those tough matchups and challenges, and when you have a whole bunch of something that your opponent doesn't have a solution for, it can very quickly feel oppressive
And don't
and
forget that
unengaging.
also when you're playing the game, you don't respawn, you don't build barracks and start recruiting units that you can then bring on the battlefield to counter your opponent. Once you start losing some units to something that is able to do, especially early game damage, like kind of like an alpha strike type thing, the game snowballs because now you have less units left to fight back with. So that's in part why I think the worst skew that you can ever have in the tabletop game is having some kind of alpha strike build that is able to do a kind of tremendous amount of damage really really quickly, especially like kind of abilities that's once per game I get to shoot twice, something like that. Even in games like 40k, which have a lot more terrain that blocks line of sight, stuff like that. Anytime you're allowed
Mhm.
to just shoot twice or do something once per game, always that happens on the first turn. So as early as possible, I'm going to try to mag dump your unit and make sure that you have as little guys left as possible to fight back uphill against me. Right?
Yeah, or sometimes it's just about I might die on turn two, so I'm just gonna shoot all. I'm just gonna use all my abilities now anyway. So there is kind of two sides to that. But yes, and inherently there is nothing wrong with that, and everybody does this to some degree and such. But it's what we're talking
Right.
about with this conversation is the spirit of the game is we're trying to create a little more awareness in the community of yes, you can do it. Yes, it is allowed. Inherently, there is nothing wrong to it, but can you still have a great weekend and fun and still bring a competitive list? If maybe you tone it down a little bit, I bet you your opponent, if you tone your list down maybe 10% on some of these skews we're talking about or some of these unengaging mechanics, I bet you your opponent on the other side of the table could have 50% more fun. And fairly, if your opponent's having 50% more fun, you're going to have a much more fun game. You're going to have a much more fun weekend. I promise you, you will.
Um, I think the last two are similar. It's basically things that are really really durable, or that only a very small section of the enemy units in the game, or units in the game in general, will be able to hurt. So I break this down as units with toughness 6 or higher and 6 or more wounds. So like basically just having a huge number of behemoths. I think in particular if they're behemoths, because behemoths have the better stomp attacks as
They
well.
do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just when as soon as you go to from toughness 5 to 6, suddenly enemy units that are strength 4 are now just like almost impossible to hurt you. And there's a lot of time where a bunch of Cathayan Lancers, for example, with their strength 4 lances, will charge into a Stonehorn, and they'll roll their 10 attacks and get 7 hits and get 0 wounds because they just didn't roll any sixes, and
Yep.
then
Pretty
they get
normal.
stomped
Yep.
to absolute paste. So having a high toughness score is a great way to make a huge section of the enemy not able to hurt you. The other way to make a huge section of the enemy not able to hurt you is to bring a unit that has ethereal or able to become ethereal. And most of the armies in the game can't just buy tons of ethereal units. But ethereal is a special rule that a lot of people don't tech against because high elves are not high elves are not the absolute end all be all. Um, and it's also really hard to plan against it, especially if you're orcs and goblins, for example. Mike, how many of your units outside of characters have magical attacks?
Outside of characters? Oh,
Yeah,
geez, I don't know that any of them do.
exactly. That was my point. 0.
Yeah, but I mean,
Now,
there are some armies that have a whole bunch, but there's
yes,
still armies that have almost none.
but all
Yeah.
skews, or at least in the high competitive scene, are banking on the idea that maybe I'll play someone who has no answer to this, and then
Mhm.
that game will be such an easy victory that maybe I'll get a couple of those, and then I'll only have to try or get lucky in some games. So if my army is really good into a third of the meta or half the meta, then my chances of getting lucky are pretty good.
I mean, sometimes it just works out that way. I mean, the reality
Yeah.
is, not only do you, have to have the stars have to, honestly, to win an event, the stars really have to align. One, you typically need to be read up on all the rules, the FAQs, and how things work. Two, you typically need to have answers and counters to the whatever is the top scary meta predator at that point in time. Three, you have to be pretty good at the game. Four, you have to your matchup. It's just random with some of the
Yeah, your
matchups, right?
matchup has
Like
to be good.
it's not just who am I matching up to as a opponent in general, but also what's the army that I happen to match up to, right? Right, and this is where situations where you could also submarine to the top, you lose a game, and then or score low and then score crush in the later rounds, and then the dice gods have to be on your side too. So the reality is, it doesn't. You could be the most skilled, amazing old world player in the world, and you still might go to the event and still not win anyway. And but that's okay because we're trying to say the point of the event is not to take home the top journal trophy. That's cool if that happens. The point of the event is to have an awesome weekend with some friends.
Right. I also think that there can be a lot more enjoyment in the game in general if you are aware at the level that your list currently sits. For example,
Mhm.
I went to doubles and I chose to bring Knightly Order, and I didn't choose to bring White Wolf, which is potentially the best of the Knightly Orders. No, I chose to bring Knights Panther, and I
A very
chose
thematic
for
list.
yes, and I chose for none of my characters to have a ward save that was active all the time. Um, the nightly order list, if you look at the statistics, playing in singles, has something on the order of 25 to 30% win rate. That's
Yeah.
so bad.
I mean,
It's
you knew going into the event it wasn't a competitive list. You went into the event saying, "I just want to take this because it sounded fun."
right. Well, I wanted to take it because it sounded fun, but I also had a separate motivation, and this is part of the spirit of the game. The second motivation was, what if I'm playing somebody where this is their first tournament? And in fact, I did play Sid and his brother, and that was their first tournament. And so
We had
I
several
don't.
people who's their first tournament.
Yeah, well, there was lots of people that was their first tournament, or at the very least their first Old
Hmm.
World Legends tournament, and
Hmm.
there are a lot of people, like other people I played in round 3 and 4, where they also took very thematic lists. And I didn't want to win just because my army list was better than my opponent's. I wanted to, if I did win, have it be based on the merits of the rolls and the luck in the game, but also on the decisions that you make during the gameplay. Now, people who are at the absolute top of the meta, they will know how to play their list into the best of everyone else. And that's
Hmm.
fine, but that's pretty damn difficult to get to. And so, for the vast majority of people out there, I think it's a lot better to just be aware when you're playing into the hardest thing out there that you don't have that high of an expectation of doing that well. Because just, basically, you've already limited yourself by taking a list that isn't necessarily as strong as it could be. So, you
Hmm.
shouldn't necessarily expect or be disappointed if it's not going as well as it should. And I think that's something I'm a little need to learn from myself.
Yeah, easier said than done. I mean, at the end of the day, um, there's a reason why you recall back in the day with Warhammer Fantasy going to events, whether it was GTs or RTTs, there was always best sportsmanship, right?
Yeah.
And different communities had ingraded sportsmanship in different ways. But after Fantasy died, I don't know at what point. Sorry, I can't recall. Maybe someone in the community can tell us in the channel. But there's a certain point where sportsmanship stopped becoming something that was done at events. Certainly in 40K, they just stopped doing it. Now, to be fair, were the old sportsmanship methods great? No. Did they lead to the way they were implemented lead to some toxic behavior? Yes, they could have, depending on the event you went to. But I think it was a big mistake to just remove it entirely as a concept of winning, and that sportsmanship is important to the spirit of the game and to the event, which is also a big part of why we like to call our tournaments. We like to call them events, right, rather than tournaments. We do use the GT label because everyone's familiar with it, but we like
Right.
to call them events, which is why we have sportsmanship as our top prize and our first pick at our prize table. We also have, bingo. We also have trivia. We have fun things throughout the whole weekend. So everybody who shows up is going to have a great time. And different communities will do different things in different ways, and there's nothing wrong with that. And different types of events, right? Whether it's singles, doubles, we're looking at narrative next, and we're excited about the plans we're cooking up for next year. But definitely keeping into account, it doesn't matter how good of a player you are, win, lose, or whatever. We're all humans. We all make mistakes. That's okay. And the goal, though, is hopefully when you have those human moments, is what I like to call them, and let's just say lose a little bit of your self control, or maybe you didn't respond to a situation as best as you would like to. Happens to all of us, myself included. Is that you can learn from it and grow from it. And I think the biggest thing at the end of the day is shaking your opponent's hand at the start of the game and the end of the game, right? And having a conversation with them, and if you felt that, oops, I had a human moment, tell them you're sorry, right? And learn from it, right? And just make sure the next game you play, it's going to be more fun for both players.
Yeah, and I think that a big part of this is awareness. So figuring out, did my opponent have a lot of fun in this game, right? That's a good thing to not be totally unaware of. And I think that
at the end of the game, you won or lost, but look across at your opponent's face. Is he laughing with you? Is he telling a story about the event, or is he kind of just looking at his dice and packing up his models and not saying anything? Maybe you should think about that.
Yeah, and I like, for example, I was playing. I told you about the game at doubles when I was playing, and a lot of my guys went and did a lot of killing blows into Gary's characters, and he was laughing and having a great time the entire time. And I told him, "You are a foul servant of chaos, so I hate you," and I get to re-roll the hit, and it was fantastic. So that is the spirit of this game, and the rules exist the way they do in part to give the competitive players or the people who are very minded to that sense a lot of things to chew on. Because guess what? Playing dwarves, playing Warriors of Chaos, playing Empire, these are very, very different challenges. And so a lot of people, they figure out how to do the puzzle in one sense, and then they say, you know what, I want to play a new army. And they start collecting and painting and trying to figure that out. And so we have a lot of people who very much enjoy engaging with the game in that sense. We also have people out there who they just want to have a good time, and perhaps maybe they have one army that they love more than anything, and they don't care if it's good or not, and they're just bringing it.
And that's okay too.
Yeah.
All right. We do have many more topics in this was likely an ongoing series about the spirit of the game, but we do need to wrap this one down. Evan, any last closing thoughts, sir?
I think that everyone out there hopefully has learned a bit more about how to stay legendary. See, I worked it in.
All right. We'll see you next time.